Hello and welcome to my studio. I'm going to show you how to paint this beautiful interior with a vase of flowers. On my palette, I have Caput Mortem Violet, Raw Sienna, Titanium White, Cadmium Lemon, Cadmium Yellow Medium, Cadmium Yellow Deep, Quinacridone Rose, Madder Lake Deep, Ultramarine Deep, and Turquoise. In a little cup, I'm using Gamblant solvent-free fluid. I'm beginning with the flowers in the center of the painting. I'm using quinacridone rose and titanium white to make light and medium pink colors. I'm going to add cadmium yellow deep and madder lake to the center. Now I'm going to use some titanium white and blend it in with the petals to give it some dimension. I'm using a bit of medium each time I blend. I'm going to paint the rest of the pink flowers next. I'll be using the same colors and some medium to blend them as well. I'm not using any paint thinner in painting this painting, and I am using both Cobra solvent-free oils and I'm using regular Rembrandt professional oils. I can use this medium with either the water mixable or the traditional Rembrandt oils. It doesn't have any odor and it's not hazardous to breathe. I don't typically use medium when I paint, and when I paint with palette knives, I never need it. But for this painting, there are a lot of fine details. I'm working on an 11-inch by 14-inch canvas panel. I'm using the fluid because I'm thinning out the paint to get the finer details, and it helps the paint flow into the crevices of the canvas. I'm using a medium tooth landscape canvas. For the yellow flowers, I'm using cadmium yellow medium, titanium white, and in some places I'm also going to add some raw sienna to tone the yellow down a bit. I want the bright pinks to really stand out and the deep yellows to stand out, but one of the beautiful things about this scene is the abundance of soft butter yellow colors. I thought about putting Naples yellow on my palette to do this painting, but I decided the colors would be richer and less chalky if I stuck with the cadmium colors. So I squeezed out cadmium lemon, cadmium yellow medium, and cadmium yellow deep, plus I added raw sienna. I've mixed greens using turquoise and cadmium lemon, and also turquoise with cadmium yellow medium. Into that, I've also added some raw sienna, and where I want to make the greens darker, I'm going to add ultramarine blue, and where they're really dark, I'm also going to add some Madder Lake. The vase in this painting is especially pretty. It has horizontal lines, which are a nice contrast to the upward movement of the flowers, which flow up and also out. But it's just a gorgeous vase. It looks like hand-blown glass. I'm painting it with ultramarine blue and turquoise, but there are a lot of colors in this vase. There are pinks and reds, yellows and greens. Pretty much every color is in this vase, even though it's a turquoise colored vase. One of the things that I love about painting interiors is painting all of the different textures. And so when I see a vase like this with lots of lines in it, vertical and horizontal lines, I want to make sure that at some point in my painting I capture all those little details. The other thing that makes painting interiors interesting is the juxtaposition of all the shapes. So the sofa is a big rectangle, and the table in front is another rectangle, and then you have the round spherical shape of the vase, and of course all the flowers have their shapes. And then you end up with a lot of interesting angles when you zoom in on a room and you do sort of a vignette like this is. So you get some weird angles and some things in the background, like in the mirror on the upper right, that seem kind of interesting to look at but don't make visual sense right away. And I like that in a painting when you have a few things that are mysterious, where someone has to look at it and try to make sense of it. So I'm using a variety of brushes. I'm using flats, brights, filberts, and rounds. These are all synthetic bristle brushes made by Silverbrush, and I'm using medium throughout the painting. Most of the sizes of the brushes I'm using are between a 0 for the smallest round brush, which I'll use at the end, and then the other sizes I'm using are 2, 4, and 6s. The yellow flowers really stand out from the dark vase at the top, and I want to bring that dark color up into the floral arrangement. It's a nice contrast to have some of the flowers standing out against the dark vase and then the dark colors of the vase moving up through the floral arrangement. Typically, in oil painting, I work from back to front or background to foreground. But in this case, I decided to paint the foreground first because I really wanted the background to support it in every way. So the colors in the background are subdued grays, and the color of the yellow sofa competes with the yellow flowers, but because it's a little bit softer yellow, a more natural yellow color and not such a bright hue, it also flows with the other colors in the painting. So I wanted to get the foreground down first and get those basic colors established and basic values established, and then start working on the background with the thought that I'm going to have to blend my edges and then add even brighter colors probably later on. But I wanted to get the background down after the foreground in this case. It's not the easiest way to do this painting, but for me it just made the most sense visually. I'm painting this in pretty much an alla prima style, meaning I'm trying to put the colors down right the first time, but I am going to go back and do more blending and add more colors and finishing touches, of course. But I'm trying to just paint it without an undertone and without too much layering of paint. Now that I have the basic floral arrangement and vase laid in, I'm going to start working on the background. I've mixed raw sienna, Caput Mortem Violet, and Ultramarine Blue to make the beautiful gray on the walls. So there are three main panels of gray. One is pinker, the one to the far left. One is a little bit lighter, this one I'm working on now, and the one to the right is a bit darker. I'm using the same color mixture for all three, but of course I'm adding more white where it's lighter. And I've added a little quinacridone rose to the one that's pinker on the far left. Now it's time to paint the table around the vase. I want to push the brown colors to be really red and orange, which they pretty much are in the reference photo, but I really wanted to bring out that warm orange color. So I started with Caput Mortem Violet and Raw Sienna, and to that I've added Pyro Red. By the way, when I started this video, I squeezed out all the colors and I forgot to put Pyro Red down, so I added it later. If you don't have Pyro Red, you can use Cadmium Scarlet, Cadmium Red Light, or Permanent Red. I'm painting around the little knobs and the keyhole. One of the other things that I love to do in these interior paintings is try to include every single little detail. Things that I might otherwise have left out in my previous painting when I used to paint a lot of landscapes and try to simplify things. Now it seems I've gone the opposite direction and I'm trying to include every little detail that I can find. And there's something charming about that. Viewers seem to really enjoy seeing all these details. And then your painting becomes more of a whole scene instead of just a vase of flowers, for instance. In this photo, it would be really easy to just zoom in on the vase of flowers and put a gray background and you'd have a beautiful painting. But it wouldn't be as unique as this one will be when you have a keyhole and little knobs and a table with reflection and the sofa in the background and all the other little details. The places where I find these reference photos are mostly on Instagram. I've been following a lot of interior designers, and when I find a photo that I really like, I use it and then I do a painting of it and then I tag them when I post it. One of the things that I also really enjoy about doing these paintings is some of the objects in the rooms are strange and I can only see a piece of them and I can't even really make out what they are, but there's just something appealing about the shape, for instance. So this bowl or this dish that I'm working on right now, only a piece of it is showing in this photo. And it's just kind of a nice shape. It's nice because the reflection of it adds to it. It's sort of like a triangle and then it opens up towards the painting or towards the center of the painting. But it's fun to paint the details that I can make out what they are, and it's fun to paint the details where I can't make out what they are. And it's sort of like a little abstract moment or an abstract section of my painting. Sometimes when I paint the stacked books, which I find very often in these designer photos, I'll put names of something that I like on them. You could always personalize your painting by putting the name of somebody you love or a place you want to go or maybe your favorite novel. You don't have to adhere to exactly what is in the picture. Now I'm going to paint the painting that's hanging on the wall. It's so much fun to paint a painting within my painting. I really enjoy painting other people's art into the walls. Sometimes, if it's a painting that I don't like, I'll substitute one of my paintings and put it in the frame that's included in the room. You can do the same thing. In the case of this room, I don't know what this abstract painting is supposed to be. It almost reminds me of a Japanese character or something, but it has a really nice vertical, strong movement, and the shape is interesting, almost like a key. And I just like it. It just seems to fit with this room. So I'm using ultramarine blue and Madder Lake to make the dark. And for the brown frame, I'm going to use Caput Mortem Violet and Raw Sienna. I'm putting some of the dark that you can see in the hole of the fireplace behind the flowers as well. I've added some dark for the hole of the fireplace, and I've left a white space between the fireplace and the gray wall because I'm going to put the fireplace mantle there. For the little knobs and the keyhole, I've used Madder Lake Deep and Ultramarine Deep, and I've used Raw Sienna and white for the gold color. I'll come back later and add more details. For the yellow of the sofa, it has a slightly greenish cast, so I used cadmium yellow medium, titanium white, raw sienna, and then I added just a hint of turquoise to give it that greenish cast. It needs to be a yellow that's slightly different from the yellow flowers, a more grayed down yellow, and in this case it's a greenish grayed yellow. I suppose if you had Naples Yellow Deep, you could use Naples Yellow Deep and some turquoise to make this color, and it might get you there faster. It's so nice to be getting the grays and the yellows of the sofa down. It's making the painting seem like it's coming together so quickly. It's already starting to look inviting and beautiful. This number 4 bright is great for going around round shapes like the vase. I can get really nice clean edges with this brush. If you look closely at the reference photo, you'll see that there's a slight shadow cast by the table onto the yellow sofa. So I've mixed raw sienna with a very small amount of ultramarine blue deep to create this shadow color. I'm putting it in with my number 4 flat brush and blending as I go. I've put a couple of highlights on the top of the sofa with just plain old titanium white and a little raw sienna. Now it's time to work on the painting on the wall again, and I'm going to do the brown big shapes. So for this brown color, I've used Pyro Red, Caput Mortem Violet, and Raw Sienna. For the beige shapes in between the brown shapes and the black shapes, I've used titanium white plus a little bit of Madder Lake Deep and raw sienna. I'm blending the edges of where the light meets the dark as I go, once again using my number 4 bright, and I don't care if the edges aren't too crisp like they are in the painting, because the painting is in the background, and so it's okay if it's a bit blurry. I think those soft edges give it a more painterly look. For the frame, I've used Caput Mortem Violet and raw sienna. Now I'm mixing up ultramarine blue and titanium white, and I'm going to paint this strange chest that appears in the mirror on the wall. So it has a sort of a blue reflection on the front of it, and I've just made that with ultramarine blue and titanium white. The sides are made with Madder Lake Deep and ultramarine blue deep. This is an example of one of those things in the painting where you can't really make out what it is right away, but somehow the shapes and colors work with the room. And so you end up with sort of an abstract little section of your painting, or something that the viewer can't quite make out right away. When I first started doing these interior scenes, my inclination was to leave out anything that didn't make visual sense to me. I only wanted to include what made sense. And so if there was something in the scene, in the photo, that I didn't understand, I would just leave it out. But later, I started adding these details, and I came to appreciate what they add to the painting. So for the light colored frame around this mirror, I've used titanium white and raw sienna. It's hard to make straight lines with a brush. In this case, I'm using a number 6 bright, and I'm using just the side of the brush, and I'm making careful straight lines. I'm doing a bit of blending to get some soft edges. This is a reflection, and reflections should have soft edges. I've also decided to lighten this gray panel to the right of the photo, or to the right of the painting on the wall. I felt like mine was too dark. Now you can really see the difference between the one that's pinkish gray and the one that's a darker bluish gray, and now the one that I've lightened. I'm painting the fireplace now. It's marble and it has black textured streaks in it, but for now I'm just going to put this light white color down. I've used raw sienna and titanium white. At this point, I'm just filling in a few of the white spaces with the colors that I see in the reference photo. I'm going to put the 2 little pots of green plants that are sitting on top of the fireplace. I'm only putting the ones on the left. I decided to leave out the ones on the right. For me, it was just too symmetrical. For the greens, I'm using ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow medium. I'm going to add some shadowing to the left of the fireplace. Light and shadow is extremely important in interiors. Just like on painting landscapes, sometimes it's dramatic and sometimes the color shifts and value shifts are subtle. The light and shadow in this painting, in this reference photo, are pretty subtle overall, but they're still there and they're still important. I'm putting some shadowing underneath the painting and around the little plants. For the shadow color, I've used ultramarine blue and Madder Lake Deep. I'm going to add some light blue highlights to the dark black shape on the painting on the wall. So for this, I'm using ultramarine blue deep and titanium white. I'm doing this because I felt like it's just a bit too dark. I'm using that same color in the shadow underneath the mirror on the wall, and I'm emphasizing the dark line in the corner between the 2 gray walls. I'm also using this color to put a little shadowing around the frame of the painting on the walls. Now I'm using a number 2 flat brush and I'm working on the reflections around the little books stacked on the table. I'm trying to mimic the colors that are in the reference photo, and I'm also graying down the sides of the books where you can see the pages. I'm blending the shadows, or excuse me, I'm blending the reflections of the books into the table. Notice on the table, I've made a lot of yellow vertical streaks to the left of the vase and the top of the table. In front of the vase, I've made sort of some reddish brown streaks where the vase is reflecting into the table. And on the right, I've left it a darker brown. This is all on purpose, and it's also what I see in the reference photo. Now I'm using Madder Lake Deep by itself with some medium, and I'm painting the chair that's sticking up behind the sofa, and I'm painting the mishmash of the floral print on what I think is another chair to the right of the yellow sofa. Again, you could leave this out, but without that mishmash of color, the yellow rectangle would look very stark, the yellow rectangle of the sofa. On the bottom right corner is a little fragment of an oriental rug. In between the red flowers on this fabric is a soft beige color. So again, I've used raw sienna and titanium white. I'm blending because this is to the right corner of the painting, and I'm letting the colors run together. Now I'm ready to start brightening up some of the greens on my vase of flowers. I want to bring some of these greens up and over the gray walls in the background, and also up and over the painting that's hanging behind the flowers. For these greens, I'm using cadmium lemon and turquoise. There are also some decorative grasses sticking out of this flower vase. To make those colors, I've used raw sienna and mixed it with the green mixture that I already mixed up using cadmium lemon and turquoise and white. Now I'm adding some dark accents among the flowers. I'm going back and forth now, trying to balance the whole painting, adding darks and lights and brighter colors. I'm using cadmium yellow deep to add accents to the yellow flowers. Next, I'm going to add some red flowers using Pyro Red and Quinacridone Rose. At this point, I'm looking at my painting and I'm trying to assess what it needs to really pull it together. So I'm adding the white flowers using titanium white and a tiny bit of cadmium yellow medium. I'm adding some highlights to the vase. I'm adding some darks where I think it needs them, and some more yellow to the flowers. I'm also blending a few edges to make it look more three-dimensional, but I'm keeping my edges pretty sharp at the center of the floral vase and the floral arrangement. I also added some thick strokes of brighter, lighter, yellowish pigment to the sofa where it surrounds the table. I just like how these edges look. It makes it look more painterly to me. I've added some little details to the cabinet that's in the mirror, that's reflected in the mirror. There's some little round things. I'm calling them things because I don't know what they are at the top. And they have a brass look to them. So I started out with ultramarine blue deep and then Madder Lake deep. And then on top of that, I added some cadmium yellow deep as a highlight to make it look gold. So as I stated before, all the little details really make these interior paintings special. And so lots of darks and lights, lots of fine lines, and just lots of illustrating as many details as you can, and especially going for the textures. So I'm just using all kinds of color mixtures to paint different colors onto the vase, onto the table, and so on. I'm looking very carefully at my reference photo and trying to pick out all the little details as best I can and translate those into paint. This is probably my favorite part of this whole painting. So now that I added all those little tiny brush strokes of detailed colors to the vase, I'm using my number 0 round brush to make little wavy lines through the vase. Now if you look at the reference photo, you'll see that the lines are much closer together and much finer, but on the scale of this painting on an 11 by 14 inch panel, this width of line works. So always think about that when you're painting. When you want to put these details in, what's the scale of your painting? If this were a 30 by 40, for instance, I could put more lines and have them closer together. Adding these lines to the vase adds a really nice texture, and it almost makes it look blended. So I took a little break and stood back from my painting, and I decided it needs a lot more lines. So I added a dark line to the top of the sofa, and I'm going to keep going around the painting and adding more lines. I added a line for the top of the fireplace, and I'm adding some other lines into the side of the fireplace to make the marble. There's some handles of something. It sort of looks like a wicker basket, or I can't really tell what it is in this reference photo, but it's an opportunity for me to make a few rounded strokes. I'm using ultramarine blue to paint some of the blue flowers that I see in this fabric. And there's another line, a cord or something that's at the seam, perhaps a shadowing area underneath the chair. So I'm just looking for details, for excuses to add impressions of details, little lines. All these little extra details will really make this painting special. It has a very nice sense of place. And that's the difference when you paint these interiors, is you're sort of painting a sense of place. You're painting a place where someone could envision themselves sitting or being, or just stopping and admiring it. It has little homey accents, designer accents, and so on. It makes it very different than just painting that vase of flowers. So I'm still adding more details to the flowers, a few more pink colors. I made this purple color, but I didn't really like it too much, so I went back to the warmer pink. I've brightened some of my reds, round and round, looking at details, looking at edges, and just trying to add all the finishing touches that I think this painting needs. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this interior room scene, and I look forward to seeing your paintings.